I still remember that day as though the wind itself carries its echo. Years have passed, and yet, the forest remains vivid in my mind, green, endless, and alive with a silence that seemed to breathe. I was a different man then, still engaged to Charlotte, still pretending that the path laid before me was one I had chosen. The morning had begun with sunlight spilling gently across the stone steps of Moor Estate. Servants moved quietly through the halls, their footsteps disciplined and distant. Among them was Samuel Carter, the man who would unknowingly change everything I understood about myself. He was unlike anyone I had ever known, composed, reserved, and impossibly calm. When he worked, he moved with precision, as though the world itself had granted him rhythm. From my window, I watched him tighten the reins on a restless horse. His shirt clung to his shoulders, his movements were neither hurried nor hesitant. There was an ease in him that I could never find in myself. Perhaps that was what first drew my eyes toward him, that strange mixture of strength and stillness. Charlotte had left early that morning for the neighboring estate. She was radiant, as she always was, full of plans and expectations. Before leaving, she kissed my cheek and told me, "Do something useful today, Ethan. Don't spend the whole morning in your books." Her voice was affectionate, but her words carried the gentle weight of command. When she was gone, the house felt larger, emptier, as though the air itself had lost its direction. I needed to escape its quiet suffocation. The forest, I thought, would do. I decided to spend the afternoon there, under the pretense of sketching the new path near the stream. I called for Samuel to accompany me. He appeared within moments, wiping his hands on a cloth, eyes lowered in respect. "Will you come with me?" I asked. "If you wish it, sir," he replied, his tone neutral, yet his voice carried a depth that unsettled me. The journey began under a bright, forgiving sky. The wheels of the small cart creaked softly, and the scent of wild thyme drifted through the air. For a while, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was not uncomfortable, it was measured, deliberate, as though we were both aware that words might disturb something fragile we did not yet understand. As we entered the edge of the forest, the light changed. The trees, tall and ancient, filtered the sun into fragments that danced upon Samuel's face. He glanced back at me once, only briefly, but in that glance, something unfamiliar passed between us, an acknowledgement, unspoken yet undeniable. I asked him about the old trail, whether he had walked it before. He nodded. "Many times, sir. It's quiet there. Safer than most think." "Safer?" I repeated, trying to mask my curiosity. He smiled faintly. "The forest only feels dangerous when you carry fear with you." There was something about that line, simple, but heavy, that settled deep inside me. I tried to respond, but my voice failed. Instead, I looked away, pretending to study the trees. After an hour, we reached the clearing near the riverbank. The air was cooler there, and the sound of running water filled the space between us. I dismounted and walked ahead, breathing deeply, feeling, for the first time in weeks, something like freedom. Samuel followed, carrying a small satchel and my sketchbook. He set them down beside a fallen log, his movements graceful, efficient. I thanked him, and he only nodded, his eyes briefly meeting mine before turning toward the water. For a moment, I simply watched him, the way his reflection rippled in the current, the way his shoulders relaxed when he thought no one was looking. There was a serenity about him that I could not name, a quiet authority that both humbled and disarmed me. I tried to focus on my drawing, but my hand trembled. Lines blurred. My thoughts wandered. I realized then that I had not truly come here for the forest or for art. I had come to be away from expectation, from judgment, from everything I was supposed to be. And somehow, Samuel's presence made that escape feel complete. When he looked at me again, it was not as a servant looks at his master, but as one soul momentarily recognizing another. It lasted only a second, but it was enough. Something shifted, imperceptibly, quietly, and the world around us felt changed. The sun began to sink, casting the clearing in a warm, golden haze. Samuel spoke softly. "Should we make camp here, sir?" I nodded, though my mind was far from the practical. I could not explain the weight in my chest, the anticipation I could neither name nor resist. As the fire crackled and dusk settled around us, I realized that the forest was not a place of escape after all. It was a mirror, one that reflected not what I was, but what I feared to be, and in that reflection, Samuel's presence lingered, silent, patient, waiting. The days that followed blurred into a careful routine, but Daniel could not shake the feeling that every moment carried hidden weight. He still laughed at Michael's dry jokes, still helped fold laundry, still joined him at Sunday dinners with Michael's parents. Yet beneath the surface, each action felt rehearsed, as if he were playing a role in a play where one wrong line could shatter the set that he thought the guilt might dull with time, but instead, it sharpened. The silence between them, once merely dull, now pulsed with accusation. Every time Michael smiled without suspicion, Daniel felt both relief and dread. Relief that his secret remained buried, dread that he was building a life on a fault line that could erupt without warning. One evening, Daniel found himself staring at Michael as he read on the sofa, glasses perched lightly on his nose, a lamp casting a soft halo around him. Michael looked peaceful, almost boyish in his concentration. Daniel felt his throat close, the thought rising unbidden, I don't deserve him. The weight of that truth made him set down his drink, his hand trembling slightly. Later that night, he dreamt of Ethan. Not of the act itself, but of the way Ethan had looked at him across the bar, like he mattered, like he was still capable of sparking desire. When he woke, the image lingered, and Daniel wondered which haunted him more, the betrayal itself, or the fact that part of him longed for that validation again. At work, he struggled to focus. Deadlines slipped by, and colleagues noticed his distracted air. His sketches lacked their usual boldness, his presentation stumbled. When his manager asked if everything was all right, Daniel forced a smile and claimed he was just tired. It was the same lie he told Michael, the same mask he wore for everyone who couldn't see the fracture beneath. One night, while clearing away dinner plates, Michael asked casually, "Are you happy?" The question landed with such force that Daniel nearly dropped the dishes. He managed a laugh, shaky and forced. "Of course. Why wouldn't I be?" But Michael's eyes lingered on him, searching, as though he sensed a shift he couldn't name. Daniel retreated to the balcony afterward, the night air cool against his skin. He realized then that secrecy had a way of isolating, of fencing him off from the very person he lived with. Michael's presence was steady, but Daniel felt increasingly apart, as though the secret had built a wall invisible to anyone else. That he began to notice cracks in Michael too. The long hours, the exhaustion etched into his features, the way his laughter came less easily these days. Perhaps they had both been drifting long before Ethan entered the picture. Perhaps the betrayal was not the cause but the symptom of something neither had confronted, yet the thought offered no comfort. It only made the silence heavier. One weekend, they attended a friend's birthday party. Surrounded by chatter and clinking glasses, Daniel watched Michael interact with old university friends, animated and relaxed in a way Daniel hadn't seen in months. He realized with a pang that Michael was still capable of lightness, still capable of connection. The problem wasn't Michael alone, it was the distance Daniel had allowed to grow between them. Walking home, Michael slipped his arm through Daniel's, a gesture so familiar it nearly broke him. Daniel forced a smile, but inside, he was unraveling. He wanted to confess, to lay the truth bare and see whether their relationship could withstand the weight. But fear held him back. Fear of destroying what little remained, fear of becoming the villain in a story they had once built together. That night, lying awake again, Daniel understood something he hadn't before. The secret wasn't going away. It had embedded itself in their life, shaping his choices, coloring his thoughts, shadowing every tender moment. And unless he faced it, through confession, or change, or some reckoning yet unknown, it would consume not only his love for Michael but also the version of himself he still wanted to be. The echo of that night with Ethan no longer lived only in memory, it lived in every silence, every hesitation, every breath beside the man he loved. Morning came pale and uncertain. The rain had stopped, leaving the air clean but heavy, as though the world hadn't yet decided what to do with the quiet. Iliad Mason woke to the hollow sound of stillness, no clatter of Grace's routine, no voice reminding him to lock the balcony door. Only his own breathing, and the faint echo of laughter that didn't belong to her. He made coffee, too strong, too bitter. His phone vibrated once on the counter. Naven Durrell, did you sleep, or did the ghosts win? Iliad smiled, thumb hesitating before replying. I slept eventually. The house didn't eat me, Naven, I'll be there in an hour then. Round 2 of ghost prevention. That he typed you don't have to, but deleted it before sending. The truth was, he wanted company. Needed it. The apartment had started to feel like an echo chamber of things left unsaid between him and Grace. When Naven arrived, sunlight had slipped through the blinds, turning the dust into floating sparks. He carried a plant, small, green, alive. You need something breathing in here, he said, placing it near the window. Something that won't leave just because it's inconvenient. Iliad looked at him, unsure how to respond. You sound like you're talking about more than a plant. Maybe, Naven said with a shrug. They spent the next hour rearranging furniture. Naven insisted the apartment had good bones but no soul. Together they shifted the couch, opened curtains, unboxed an old easel Iliad hadn't touched in over a year. Each movement seemed to clear a corner of his mind. You kept this? Naven asked, brushing dust from the easel. I couldn't throw it away, Iliad said. Even when I told myself I'd stopped. You didn't stop, Naven said softly. You just forgot what it felt like to make something for yourself. The word struck something deep. Iliad felt a pull of gratitude, and something gentler, unnamed, they painted that afternoon. Not art, just color, Naven's suggestion. Blue streaks across old canvas, laughter echoing between brushstrokes. It felt childish and necessary. For the first time in months, Iliad wasn't performing for anyone. When the sun dipped, Naven offered to order dinner. They ate cross-legged on the floor again, surrounded by the smell of curry and turpentine. Conversation drifted, quiet and easy. Grace ever paint with you? Naven asked. Iliad shook his head. She doesn't like the mess. That's the best part, Naven said, smiling. The mess means it's real. Iliad wanted to say that nothing between him and Grace felt real anymore, but the words wouldn't form. Instead, he found himself studying Naven's face, the way his eyes softened when he spoke, the calm behind his humor. The world seemed to narrow to the sound of his voice. That it scared him. When Naven reached across to hand him a napkin, their fingers brushed. It was brief, almost accidental, but it lingered in Iliad's mind like static. His heart thudded, a rush of confusion and recognition. He withdrew his hand too quickly, pretending to wipe the table. Naven noticed. His tone gentled. You don't have to be afraid of small things, Iliad. It's not that, Iliad said, though it was exactly that. It was the small things that broke him open, a word, a look, a touch, reminders of how distant he'd grown from the life he was supposed to be living. They finished dinner in silence. Outside, the wind began again, brushing the window panes like fingertips. When Naven finally stood to leave, Iliad walked him to the door. You've got paint on your cheek, Naven said, smiling. He reached out instinctively, thumb brushing it away. The contact was soft, deliberate. Neither spoke. For a heartbeat, the space between them held more weight than words could carry. Iliad's throat tightened, guilt rose fast and sharp. He stepped back, hands trembling slightly. Thank you for today, he said, voice quieter than he intended. Naven's smile faltered, but he nodded. Anytime. Really. The door closed again, but this time the silence felt heavier. Iliad walked to the half-finished painting, a wash of blue and gray that looked like a storm scene from far away. It wasn't beautiful, but it was alive. He stared at it until the lines blurred. His phone buzzed once more. Naven, I hope today helped. You look lighter. Iliad typed, deleted, retyped. Finally, he sent. It did. Too much, maybe. He set the phone down, heart pounding, realizing how far the line had already moved, and how much further it might go. Years have passed since that summer at Liam's family estate, yet Arthur Whitmore's memory still lingers in the quiet corners of my mind. Time has softened the sharp edges of guilt, but it hasn't erased the ache entirely. Some stories stay unfinished, not because they lack an ending, but because their truth refuses to fade. I've often wondered what Arthur thought in those final days after I left. Whether he regretted it. Whether he, too, replayed those moments, our stolen glances, our quiet conversations, the way we both pretended not to know what was happening until it was too late. There was tenderness in the silence between us, but also tragedy in its inevitability. I kept his letter, folded carefully inside one of my old journals. Sometimes I take it out, not to read it, but to remind myself that once, I was seen fully, without disguise or judgment. That alone changed me. And the years that followed, I tried to live differently. I dated men my own age, pursued relationships built on honesty, yet something always felt a little borrowed. None of them looked at me the way Arthur did, with that calm certainty that seemed to see straight through every defense I had ever built. It wasn't love in the ordinary sense, it was recognition, something ancient and fleeting, like two mirrors briefly facing each other. Once, I returned to the countryside. Liam had invited a few old friends to his wedding. He was happy, truly happy, and seeing him like that filled me with both pride and sorrow. The house looked smaller, the garden less wild. Arthur was gone by then. I knew before asking. Liam mentioned it gently, unaware of how carefully I was holding my breath. He passed last spring, he said. Peacefully, in his sleep. Then he smiled, the way people do when remembering kindness. You'd have liked how he went, still reading, still surrounded by the same old books. I nodded, managing a small smile. My chest felt hollow, yet strangely light. That night, I walked out into the garden after everyone had gone to bed. The roses were still there, though older, untended. I touched one of the petals, remembering the way Arthur's voice had sounded that evening in the rain, soft and trembling with truth. You have a long life ahead, he'd said. Don't let this moment define it. I hadn't understood then what he meant. But now, standing in the dark garden years later, I finally did. He wasn't warning me to forget, he was teaching me how to carry something without letting it destroy me. Grief and gratitude often wear the same face. I closed my eyes and whispered his name, half afraid the wind might answer. The night smelled of rain again. For a moment, I could almost hear his voice, measured, patient, unashamed. When I left the estate the next morning, I didn't say goodbye to the others. I simply walked through the dew-soaked grass toward the main road, the rising sun painting the fields gold. I felt lighter than I had in years. On the train ride back, I opened Arthur's letter one final time. The paper had grown brittle, the ink fading slightly at the edges. I read it slowly, the words settling into me like a final benediction. If ever you find yourself doubting the worth of what we shared, remember this: truth rarely fits into the shapes the world demands. What matters is that, for a moment, we dared to be honest, despite consequence, despite fear. And that honesty will outlive us both. I folded the letter again and tucked it into the inside pocket of my jacket, as if carrying him with me. Now, when I tell stories about love, I never speak of Arthur by name. But I always leave space for him, in the pauses, in the quiet turns of reflection, in the parts of me still learning what it means to forgive myself. Some loves don't need to last forever to be real. They simply need to be understood, and maybe that's what Arthur gave me in the end, not regret, but recognition, the kind that doesn't fade, even as time insists on moving forward. When people ask if I ever loved someone impossible, I smile and say, yes. Once. And it changed everything. Because it did. And in some small, invisible way, it still does.